What price would you pay for power? Would you spill the blood of strangers? Would you betray a friend? Or, if destiny forced your hand, would you kill your own brother? These were not abstract questions in the Ottoman Empire. They were the daily reality of princes born into the shadow of the throne. For them, the crown was not an honor, but a curse. Every smile from a sibling carried the weight of suspicion. Every shared meal could be the last. For, in this empire, the line between survival and execution was as thin as a silken cord. Imagine, for a moment, the grandeur of Istanbul. At its height, minarets pierced the sky, echoing with the call to prayer. Markets overflowed with spices from Arabia, silk from Persia, and jewels from India. The Ottoman armies stood undefeated, their banners flying from North Africa to Eastern Europe. To the world outside, the sultans were gods of conquest, untouchable, eternal, invincible. But within the walls of Topkapi Palace, another story unfolded, a story the poets dared not sing, and the historians often softened in their ink. For every victory parade that dazzled the citizens, there was a silent burial carried out at midnight. For every sultan crowned in gold, there were princes strangled in silence, heirs whose only crime was being born. Picture the torch-lit corridors of the palace. The air is heavy, thick with incense and whispers. Guards march with deliberate steps, their eyes cast downward, unwilling to meet the gaze of the small figures they are ordered to escort. Behind closed doors, the cries of children pierce the night, and then just as suddenly, fade into silence. By dawn, the empire awakens to a new ruler. The people cheer, the cannons roar, but no one speaks of the lives cut short in the shadows. To the sultans, blood was not family, it was the currency of survival. So again I ask you, if your brother stood between you and the throne, would you let him live, or would you silence him forever, knowing that mercy could mean your own execution? Before we uncover the darkest secrets the sultans buried, make sure you subscribe so these forbidden stories don't vanish again. In the Ottoman world, power was never inherited with ease. It was seized in blood. But unlike the kings of Europe, who passed crowns from father to son, the Ottoman Sultans lived by a harsher truth. The throne belonged not to the eldest or the most beloved, but to the one strong enough or ruthless enough to take it. And so, when a sultan died, his sons did not mourn together as brothers. They became rivals in a silent, deadly contest where hesitation meant death. Sultan Mehmed II, remembered in the West as Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who brought down the walls of Constantinople, gave this unwritten law a chilling permanence. In his imperial code, he declared that a sultan had the right, indeed, the duty, to kill his brothers for the stability of the empire. He justified it as necessity, a way to prevent civil war. But what it created instead was a dynasty, where every cradle could become a coffin, and every lullaby a whispered prayer for survival. Princes were raised, not as siblings, but as shadows, each one knowing that only one would see adulthood unscathed. The palaces of the Ottomans, filled with the scent of roses and the shimmer of golden tiles, were also filled with whispers of fear. Imagine a young boy, barely 10 years old, taught to ride horses, wield a sword, and memorize the Quran with perfect precision. He is loved by his mother, adored by his tutors, yet both know the truth. If his elder brother ascends the throne, this boy may never see manhood. The servants who bow to him today may be the very ones to bind his hands tomorrow. At night, the corridors echoed not with childish laughter, but with silence, the kind of silence that only comes when every family member is also a rival, and every gift of affection could be the last. Take the reign of Selim the governed, remembered as Selim the Grim. When his father Bayezid II faltered, Selim seized power with a ferocity that left no doubt who ruled. To secure his throne, he ordered the execution of his brothers, and even his nephews, young boys, who posed no immediate threat, yet whose very existence was deemed dangerous. Strangled with silk bowstrings, Their bodies disappeared into the shadows of the palace. To the Ottomans, this was not cruelty, it was policy. For Selim, mercy was weakness, and weakness could splinter an empire. His reign, built upon fratricide, expanded Ottoman dominion into Egypt and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. To his people, he was a victorious ruler. To his family, he was death in human form. And so it was for centuries. The throne of the Ottomans was not a seat of honor, but a battlefield where the war began at birth. For an Ottoman prince, a cradle was only a step away from the grave. The price of empire was paid not only by enemies at the gates, but by sons within the palace. Most viewers will leave here, uneasy at the thought of brothers strangling brothers. But you, if you stay, you will discover why silence was the only survival, and why blood was the empire's first law. To outsiders, the harem was a place of fantasies, jeweled chambers filled with silken pillows, perfumed air, and women whose beauty was said to rival paradise itself. But to those who truly understood its walls, the harem was no dream. It was a battlefield. It was not pleasure that ruled here, but politics. Behind its latticed windows and locked gates, rival factions plotted, whispered, and waited, for the harem was more than a sanctuary of women. It was the empire's hidden court. Every concubine, every wife, every child born within its walls was a potential piece in a deadly game of succession. And at its center, more powerful than generals or viziers, were the sultan's favored women, who often wielded influence sharper than any blade. One such woman was Roxelana, known to history as Harem Sultan. She arrived not as a queen but as a slave, taken from her homeland in what is now Ukraine. Yet through wit, charm, and a mind as cunning as any statesman's, she rose to capture the heart of Suleiman the Magnificent. To win him was not enough. She dismantled centuries of tradition, displacing rivals and ensuring her sons had the strongest claim to the throne. Hurrem was accused of sorcery, of poison, of manipulating Suleiman into executing his own beloved son, Mustafa. Whether true or not, what cannot be denied is that her influence reshaped the empire itself. She proved that the harem was not a cage of silk. It was the empire's most dangerous chamber. And then came Kozum Sultan, perhaps the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. She ruled not beside one sultan, but through several, first as wife, then as mother, and finally as grandmother, to emperors too young or too weak to rule themselves. Kozum controlled ministers, commanded armies through proxies, and decided life and death from behind veils. Yet power came with peril. Enemies multiplied in the dark corners of the palace, and in 1651 she met her end, not in battle, but at the hands of her rivals inside the very harem she once dominated, strangled with her own hair by eunuchs loyal to her enemies. Kozum's death was the ultimate proof in the Ottoman harem. No throne, no beauty, no alliance lasted forever. But it was not only queens who held power. Eunuchs, black-robed and silent, served as the harem's watchers. They carried secrets through hidden corridors, their loyalty bought by gold or fear. Messages traveled folded in silks, laced with coded words, from one chamber to another, deciding who would rise and who would fall. In the dead of night, poison found its way into cups, assassins crept past slumbering guards, and the empire's fate shifted with the softest footsteps. The harem was not just a prison of women, it was the empire's secret parliament, its invisible war room, and sometimes its execution chamber. Most viewers will quit here, leaving with only half the truth. They'll think the harem was a place of luxury and lust, but you, if you stay, you will uncover how these women shaped the empire's destiny, and why the fate of sultans often rested in their hands. Don't make the mistake of leaving their story in the shadow. Power can build nations, but it can also rot the mind from within. For the Ottoman Sultans, rulers of unimaginable wealth and authority, temptation was everywhere. Gold poured into the palace from 3 continents. Servants bowed at their slightest command, and armies obeyed their whispers. Yet beneath the grandeur of empire, obsessions took root like poison in the soil, twisting powerful men into prisoners of their own desires. Behind the marble walls of Topkapi and Dolmabahce, far from the battlefield's roar, the sultans revealed not their strength, but their weakness, and these weaknesses, hidden from the eyes of subjects, would sometimes drag entire generations into darkness. Few embodied this decay more than Sultan Ibrahim, remembered by history with a chilling name, Ibrahim the Mad. Born into fear and paranoia, he was locked away in the palace for most of his youth, forbidden to rule, forbidden to live. When at last he was placed on the throne, years of confinement had already broken something inside him. Obsessed with luxury, he demanded concubines be dressed in the rarest furs even in the height of summer heat. He filled chambers with silken garments and jewels, indulging in grotesque displays of wealth. But his most disturbing obsession was with the women of the harem. At the height of his madness, he ordered hundreds of concubines drowned in the Bosporus, their jeweled bodies sinking beneath the waves. No reason was ever recorded, only the silence of the water swallowing his cruelty. Ibrahim's rule ended not in triumph, but in betrayal. He was deposed and executed, remembered not as a ruler, but as a cautionary tale of unchecked indulgence. Then there was Muradi I, a man of contradictions. He rose to power with iron discipline, declaring war on drunkenness and vice. He banned alcohol, coffee, and tobacco across the empire, patrolling the streets in disguise to catch offenders. Those who defied him were punished with swift, brutal severity. And yet, behind the locked doors of his palace, Murad himself drank deeply. As his reign grew older, he surrendered to the very vice he had outlawed, drowning himself in wine until his health decayed. He died young, not at the blade of an enemy, but at the slow, suffocating hand of addiction. His story was one of hypocrisy, of a ruler who could command an empire, but not his own desires. And they were not alone. Hidden chambers within the palaces revealed grotesque collections, rooms overflowing with jewels, hoarded like dragon's treasure, chambers stuffed with exotic animals for amusement, and spaces decorated, not for beauty, but for obsession. These were not halls of reason, but of excess, reflections of minds warped by absolute power. To their subjects, the sultans were the caliphs of Islam, defenders of faith, leaders of army. But behind closed doors they were men undone by their cravings, their humanity twisted into something darker. If you leave now, you'll never hear the secrets locked behind their gilded doors. Most people will turn away, choosing the comfort of myths over the ugliness of truth. But if you stay, you will see how power not only ruled the world but destroyed the very men who held it. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan was the shadow of God on earth. His word was law, his power absolute, and yet, inside the gilded walls of his own palace, he was never safe. The empire he commanded with armies and decrees could not protect him from the whispers in the corridors, the daggers hidden in sleeves, or the silent steps of the eunuchs who might come for him at night. For all the cannons and cavalry the Ottomans commanded, the most dangerous enemies were not foreign kings or rival empires. They were the men who lived closest to the Sultan, the janissaries, the viziers, the guards who could shift in a moment from protectors to executioners. The empire's greatest threat was not its enemies, but its own walls. The janissaries were the Sultan's elite guard, trained from childhood, feared for their discipline, and entrusted with the empire's safety. But over time, their loyalty shifted. They became kingmakers, deciding not only who would live on the throne, but who would die trying to claim it. A sultan who angered them, who pushed reforms too far, or who threatened their privileges, could find himself dragged from his chambers, stripped of authority, and strangled before dawn. The bowstring of silk became the empire's most dreaded instrument, for Ottoman law forbade the spilling of royal blood. Death came not with swords, but with silence, as soft cords tightened around the necks of princes and rulers alike. One of the most shocking betrayals was the fall of Osman II, a young sultan who dreamed of restoring the empire's former glory. Osman sought to break the power of the janissaries, to reform their ranks and end their corruption, but ambition blinded him to the danger. In 1622, The Janissaries revolted. They stormed the palace, dragging the terrified sultan from his chambers. The boy who had been crowned ruler of millions was beaten, humiliated, and finally strangled by the very guards sworn to protect him. His body was left broken, a warning to all who followed. The throne of the Ottomans was never secure, not even for the man who wore its crown. Palace coups became a pattern, a cycle of fear and betrayal that bled through the centuries. Sultans lived knowing that the eunuchs who poured their wine, the guards who bowed before them, the viziers who kissed their robes, all could become conspirators in a heartbeat. Behind the lattice-work screens and marble columns, plots unfolded like shadows. Alliances whispered, guards bribed, assassins summoned. Some rulers struck first, ordering the deaths of ministers and generals before they themselves could be overthrown. Others hesitated, and hesitation meant doom. In this empire of splendor, survival was a game of suspicion, and even victory was fleeting. You've come this far into the Sultan's secrets, and here the betrayals are at their darkest. To leave now is to turn your back, just before the most shocking truths are revealed. Stay, and you will see how the empire's golden mask was torn apart from within. The Ottomans built a dynasty that stretched across 3 continents, ruled for 6 centuries, and left monuments that still defy time. But beneath the soaring minarets and golden mosaics lay a darker inheritance, carved not in stone but in blood and silence. Every murdered prince, every poisoned concubine, every strangled sultan left behind more than a corpse. They left behind fractures, cracks in the foundation of power that no marble dome could hide. The empire's story was not only one of conquest and glory, it was also one of wounds inflicted from within, wounds that never fully healed. Succession, the very heartbeat of monarchy, was poisoned by fear. The fratricide law that made Ottoman power so ruthless also weakened its bloodline. Princes raised in fear of their brothers grew into rulers haunted by paranoia. Some spent their childhoods locked away in the cafes, the gilded cage, where potential heirs were imprisoned to prevent rebellion. There they withered in isolation, their minds unraveling so that when they finally wore the crown, they wore it with trembling hands. A law designed to preserve strength instead bred weakness, creating sultans who were more shadows than sovereigns. The harem too left its mark. It was more than a sanctuary of pleasure. It was a hidden parliament, a battlefield of silken whispers. Women like Harem Sultan and Kazem Sultan bent the empire's destiny with their cunning, reshaping policies and shifting alliances. Yet, this invisible power also entangled the empire in endless webs of intrigue, poisoned cups, midnight assassinations, secret bargains with eunuchs. These were the instruments of politics in the inner chambers. While the empire's armies clashed with Europe and Persia, its fate was just as often decided in the candlelit silence of the harem. And then came the vices. Sultans who ruled nations could not rule themselves. Ibrahim the Mad drowned his concubines in the Bosphorus, obsessed over silks and furs while the empire bled. Murad the Firth, who banned alcohol with an iron fist, destroyed himself with the very poison he outlawed. Palaces filled with grotesque collections, chambers stuffed with jewels and animals, spoke of rulers drunk on excess, while their empire slipped further into decay. What began as indulgence ended as corrosion, eating away at the empire's stability from the inside. So the question remains, did secrecy preserve the Ottomans, or did it doom them? For centuries the walls of Topkapi Palace hid the screams, the betrayals, the obsessions of its rulers. The empire endured longer than most in history, and yet the same shadows that preserved its power ultimately weakened it. When the empire finally collapsed in the 20th century, it did so not only because of invading armies or foreign pressures, but because its foundations had been gnawed hollow by centuries of silence and fear. If you leave now, you'll never understand how the empire's golden mask hid a heart of shadows. Stay, because history's darkest truths are not just stories, they are warning. Behind every empire, no matter how radiant its triumphs, there lies a hidden cost. The Ottoman Sultans built monuments that touched the heavens, libraries that preserved knowledge, and armies that made kings tremble. Yet none of this came without shadows. For every minaret that pierced the skyline, there was a silenced brother whose breath was stolen in the night. For every jewel-encrusted dome, there was a concubine poisoned in secret. For every imperial decree etched into law, there was a whisper in the harem that changed the course of history without ever being recorded. What survives in marble and manuscript is only half the story. The other half is written in blood and silence. The ruthless secrets of the Ottomans are not distant curiosities locked in a forgotten century. They are reminders of how power, when left unchecked, twists even the mightiest dynasties into knots of fear, obsession and betrayal. The fratricide law showed us how survival can become cruelty disguised as necessity. The harem revealed how women hidden from the public eye wielded invisible power that could topple viziers and alter empires. The addictions and obsessions of rulers showed how human frailty corrodes even the strongest crowns, and the betrayals within palace walls proved that the deadliest enemies are often not across the battlefield, but across the banquet table. But there is also a reflection here, one that does not belong only to the past. Every empire has secrets. Rome had its poisons, Egypt, its betrayals, China, its eunuchs whispering in imperial courts. The Ottomans simply left theirs painted in palaces of marble and whispered in corridors, still echoing with the ghosts of their rulers. Their story is not just history, it is a mirror. When power becomes absolute, when silence is safer than truth, when fear is sharper than loyalty, then even the grandest empires begin to rot from within. So what do we learn from these shadows? That greatness and brutality are often twins, inseparable, born from the same hunger for survival and domination. That the grandeur of empires is built not only by architects and generals, but also by those who conspire in the dark, who poison in silence, who strangle with silk to preserve the illusion of order, and that every golden throne hides stains that no polish can erase. The Ottoman legacy is both magnificent and monstrous, a reminder that history is always more complicated than the tales we prefer to tell. And perhaps the final truth is this: the Ottomans tried to bury their secrets, to veil them behind the curtains of the harem and the walls of Topkapi. Yet here we are, centuries later, unearthing what they tried to hide. That is the power of history. It cannot be silenced forever. If you're still here, you're not just a viewer, you're a guardian of stories history tried to bury. Most will leave, content with fairy tales of sultans and palaces, but you now carry the truth, and that makes you part of the legacy. And now, after walking through the gilded halls, the blood-soaked chambers, and the silken shadows of Topkapi, I leave you with one final question. Imagine you were born, not in this century, but into the house of Osman, swaddled in silk, raised as a prince beneath domes of gold. You are cherished, fed by servants, taught by tutors, and whispered about as the possible future of an empire that stretches across continents. But from the day of your birth, you carry a curse. You know that your brother's smile hides the knowledge that one day only one of you may live. So I ask you, if the moment came, if the bowstring was placed in your hand, could you strangle your own brother in the night to secure your crown? Or would you spare him, and in sparing him, risk your empire collapsing in flames? That was the choice every Ottoman prince faced: survival or mercy, power or conscience, blood or ruin. Which would you choose? The Ottomans wanted their secrets to remain behind marble walls, hidden in diaries that burned, whispered only by eunuchs who took them to the grave. But tonight, you've seen them uncovered. You've learned of princes murdered in their cradles, concubines poisoned in the silence of the harem, sultans undone by madness and desire, and emperors strangled by their own guards. You've glimpsed the truth that history tried to bury, that behind the grandeur of empire was fear, so deep it swallowed fathers, brothers, and lovers whole. But this story doesn't end with me telling it. It lives, or it dies, depending on you. If you turn away now, if you click off without subscribing, without sharing, then these secrets sink back into the dark. The Ottomans win. Their golden mask will remain, and their shadows will stay hidden. But if you stay, if you choose to subscribe, you become more than a viewer. You become a keeper of forbidden history, someone who refuses to let truth be erased. You make sure the empire's darkest truths remain alive, not as whispers but as warnings for every generation to come. So here's what I ask of you. Subscribe for more forbidden stories of empires, because there are more secrets, more betrayals, more forgotten histories waiting in the shadows. Leave a comment. Which sultan do you think was the most dangerous? Was it Selim the Grim, who painted Anatolia in blood, or Ibrahim the Mad, who drowned his harem in terror? Or perhaps Osman II, whose ambition cost him his life at the hands of his own guards? Tell me what you think, because history is not a lecture. It is a conversation. And if this story shook you, if you felt the weight of these marble palaces and the whispers of blood in the night, then like and share this video. Don't let their secrets vanish again. Pass them forward, so that more people learn what power does when it hides behind silk and gold. If you leave without subscribing, the Ottomans win. Their darkest truths stay hidden, buried beneath centuries of silence. But if you stay, if you subscribe, if you comment, you ensure that their ghosts are not forgotten, and their shadows cannot be erased. The empire may have fallen, but its secrets live only if you choose to carry them.